How's it going, people of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Welcome to, once again, another Hawkeye recap, review, and breakdown. By the way, if I sound sick, that's because I am. This week, I've been dealing with one of those horrible winter colds, which sucks because I just got out of one a couple of weeks ago, and then here I am again. But I'm not too ill to make this video. So yeah, I just wanted to give my thoughts on the third episode of this series, which I did find thoroughly entertaining, especially with the little teasers, if you will, of Wilson Fisk. And I'm sure pretty much all of you would have picked up on that. So I just want to dive into this. Leave me your thoughts on episode 3. How do you feel it compared to the first couple of episodes? Do you feel like this one was even better? Perhaps because we got a little bit more action? Yeah, let me know. But let's start off at the very beginning in where we get that 2007 flashback, focusing on one particular girl in the classroom, none other than Echo, who we met at the very end of episode 2. Now, I really like how this episode kind of got into this character and her abilities that come out of her being deaf, and how there's somewhat parallels, I guess you can make, through how, for example, we got those conversations between her father and her, and you can somewhat mirror that to the first episode between Kate and her father, and how from there on out it was somewhat this dedication of training, which of course we saw the young Echo get into, where she just mopped the floor with that kid, in where she more or less just, can really learn through watching, which also speaks to some of her, source material abilities as well, and just the way they kind of rendered that into this episode, I thought they did a very, very good job. And also, it was a really nice, pleasant surprise to see Zahn McClarnon, I believe his name is. I've seen him in Westworld, and I've always thought he's a very, very impressive actor, and just already, even though we didn't get a bunch of him in this episode because of what happens, those scenes between him and a younger Echo, I absolutely adored. But of course, I have to tackle the uncle. Like, this episode was littered with Wilson Fisk references, and you have to think, are they going to go even more on the nose? This could be a very, very low-key build-up to what is obviously potentially coming in the future of the MCU. Now, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent here, but as we've heard, with the continuation of Daredevil, the rumors floating out there, they are going to apparently be using these same actors, but obviously I believe the rumors were that they might be very, very slight different versions of themselves. And I know that comes across as alienating to a lot of fans, because it's like, well, what's the point then if you're using the Charlie Cox Daredevil or the Netflix Wilson Fisk if it's not going to be the exact same? I don't want to be too judgmental just yet until I see what the MCU does with them, if at all, in the future. But evidently, from what we can take from this episode with Vincent's Kingpin, and we're about to get into that in a second, it is, it does seem as though those rumors could be true. So the way I take it is that with the rawness of Netflix's Marvel shows, I just don't think they're going to go that hard when potentially bringing Charlie Cox's Matt Murdock into the MCU, albeit when you see him, for example, in No Way Home, which I think we're going to, he will basically look the same. But if we're ever going to see Daredevil in action again, or these other characters in action again, I don't think they can get as bleak as what we did in those Marvel Netflix shows, which may be a disappointment to some, but it's also not surprising because, the MCU addresses a much larger audience. And for me, I'm kind of juggling with the fact that I really want to see the Daredevil cast again, rather than not see them at all, if that makes sense. But getting back to the uncle comment, obviously we had Echo's father saying that uncle will take you home after class. And that's where we see this man walk up to the frame. We can see a similar suit get up as to what Wilson Fisk would wear. And the little chuckle that came out from this towering man as he grabbed Echo's face, that was definitely Vincent D'Onofrio's character from the Marvel Daredevil Netflix show, Wilson Fisk. I don't see how anyone can argue against that. Listen to it again. So obviously, speaking into the larger thing here, with there being this potential larger man in the background, and there's lots of theories coming off and bouncing off this, like who bought the Avengers Tower? Could it be someone else, or could it be Fisk? Obviously, from the rumors, which is why I wanted to mention those, there does seem to be this longevity, or this kind of somewhat plan to incorporate those characters that we loved from the Marvel Netflix show into the MCU. It's just obviously going to take a little bit of time, and here are the first steps with the Vincent's Kingpin in this show, like undoubtedly, and it just makes you think, are they making grander moves? For example, Avengers Tower, and maybe even seeing him in one of the episodes to come. I would absolutely love that. But let me know at the same time if you think, yes, this is Vincent's Kingpin, but it's nothing more than a tease, and they're not really going to do anything at all. But I do think they will. Now, as we go through some of the flashbacks, this is where we see Echo arrive back at the somewhat HQ for the Tracksuit Mafia, and they are getting absolutely wiped out by Ronin back in the day, in where Ronin would, well, yeah, do his thing, and this is exactly what he would do. Brutally take out people in an effort to clean it up, but as we know, this is somewhat what scars Clint, because his methods were very, very brutal. Now, Echo arrives just in time to say goodbye to her father, as he was practically impaled by Ronin, thus setting up this vendetta and this vengeance she has against Ronin, which obviously leads to the present-day scenes of Clint and Kate riding those freaking ponies. Now, in the comic books, it is actually Wilson Fisk, instead of Ronin in this live-action adaptation, who murders her father, and that somewhat leads onto a longer arc where she eventually finds out, and she becomes somewhat more of a heroic figure, and that actually even turns into her donning the Ronin suit. Now, in this iteration, obviously, we see that it was Ronin, but you can still see the similarities. From here on out, I'm sure Wilson Fisk very much so looked after her. I mean, after all, as we saw in that flashback scene, her father says, "Uncle is gonna take you home," and that was Fisk. So you see how that is very much so a figure, well, like a father figure to her. And as we go throughout the episode, we also hear Kaza talk about how Uncle might not be happy with the way that Echo is handling things with the Tracksuit Mafia and what's going on with Clint and Kate, because obviously from this moment onwards, it was very likely that Wilson Fisk says, right, you take the reins, you know, take your father's mantle, if you will, or, you know, ruling over the Tracksuit Mafia. So yeah, so much Wilson Fisk. I just hope that we get to have a little bit more than just these very, very low-key teasers. As for the scenes between Kate, before we get to that fight, which I really, really did enjoy, you know, I know it is MCU humor, and I am a bit particular on my MCU humor. Like, as I do want to preface, I do like MCU humor. I'm a big fan of James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy films, which arguably are probably some of the most humor-filled Marvel movies out there. But that moment with the tracksuit guy talking about Imagine Dragons and how the thug was about to get a pen to take notes on Kate's advice, I was just a bit like, yeah, no. But, I mean, fair enough if you felt a different way. Just want to reiterate, we can all have different opinions here. As for when Echo arrives, I have to say, I really do like her presence in this show. I feel like from where we saw her in this moment, communicating with Clint, some of the dialogue, I really like her as a character, and I'm glad that we may actually see more from her beyond this show in the future of the MCU. Not to mention, obviously, when she was fighting Clint in that fight scene that unfolded after this, it was pretty badass, and obviously we have the context as to how she got so badass with those flashbacks earlier on in the episode. I also find it interesting how she didn't want to buy straight away what Clint was saying and how Ronin is dead. Kate just put the suit on, and Kate even explained herself that she put it on because she didn't want to be recognized at the auction, but Echo was very, you know, just not buying anything, and even Clint's excuse of Black Widow killing Ronin, which, you know, is kind of true in a certain point of view, if you know what I mean, because Black Widow was the one to somewhat turn Clint away from being Ronin, so that kind of personality did die ever since that moment we saw way back when. Compared to the first couple of episodes with the choreography, I found this part of the fight, until a bit later, but we'll get there, really entertaining. I didn't feel like a lot of it was far-fetched. I know a few of them had guns, but for the most part, a lot of the Tracksuit Mafia had just baseball bats and they were going after Clint that way, so a lot of the stuff was comic booky cool, but also not too hard or asking me to believe too much there. This was overall just very, very entertaining. It showed how Echo had a bit of the upper edge, because as she said herself, that Clint was a bit too over-reliant on the technology and how he might even be better off without it if he just learnt how to adapt in the way she had. Overall, I just found it nice action as Clint and Kate were beginning their escape. I did feel like a little bit like, okay, you're kind of escaping for your lives and you're skipping a car, you know, the Dodge Challenger for the sake of another car. Like, you wouldn't really... I know that doesn't bother some people, but to me, you would just smash that car. And of course, we get the dashboard smack, which brings the car to life. You know, that couldn't really be any more convenient. Once again, I do want to stress, I really found this entertaining, the car chase scene with Clint and Kate, the trick arrows and stuff, but it did provide a few issues which I just feel like are relevant at the end of the day, which the first part of the fight scene didn't really shove in my face too much. First of all, I did kind of like the one-shot-esque feel that we had of this chase scene. I'm always a big fan of stylistic choices made like that in episodes, especially when it comes to action. Have to admit though, when it came to the putty arrow, I did feel like the CGI on that was very shoddy. Not a massive issue, call that a nitpick, that's fine. I just noticed it and it looked like video game graphics on the hood of that car. So my issue is, despite how much fun I was having in this moment, because I love the dynamic between Kate and Clint. That's my favorite thing about this show, and obviously it should be, because that's what this show is. Kate and Clint, Hawkeye, kind of speaking to both of them, right? But as I was saying, my issue was just, I found it very convenient that not a single tracksuit gang member was shooting at Kate when they were in pursuit of her while she was hanging out the window. Yet when they got to the bridge part, that's when that guy who was in the passenger seat next to Echo in the Challenger got his pistol out. That's, these little conveniences I do notice, and it just does cause an issue in the way that, why didn't he get the gun out before and start shooting at her there? I'm not saying she's an easy target, I'm not saying that it isn't hard to shoot someone in a car chase, but I'm just saying, why get the gun out there, but not beforehand? It's I think, fairly valid criticism. Just to add on top of that, I found it kind of weird where, for example, where Kate and Clint did jump off, did the badass kind of arrow grapple hook, a nice callback to the Hawkeye traditional move, and where he just does that, and what she saw him do way back in the Avengers flashback. It's just, if you look at it very objectively, it's just like, okay, well, if you're willing to shoot both of them as they're grappling off, as in kill both of them, you're trying to shoot Clint as he's taking cover behind the car, and you were also shooting at Kate in the future in a couple of seconds. Why aren't you shooting her there when she's like, I've got a scary arrow? You could just shoot her. Do you know what I mean? Convenient. Those are the only things that I think took me out of this overall very, very entertaining action sequence, which, as of when this moment after that, they grappled off and then managed to get onto that train, which, once again, I do want to say, love that train moment. The dynamic between Kate and Clint was great here. This kind of humor wasn't too much MCU humor for me, when he couldn't really hear her and repeated basically what she just said, and she just had a little smirk smile on her face. That's very tasteful in my opinion, and it wasn't too in the face like that freaking thug earlier, be like, oh, I need to get a pen and talk about what you were on about with the imagined dragons. No, that's a bit too much. One last thing as well, I know this is in self-defense, but Kate basically, more or less, probably, very likely, killed people. I mean, if we take into account that when she shot that arrow, that van just went up in flames, and it's very likely those two people were very toast. I would just like to know how she deals with the fact that she probably killed at least one or two Tracksuit Mafia people. I know it's fully in self-defense, and by the way, I'm absolutely fine with that. I just think that it should be acknowledged when heroes, or even a hero in training, someone as young as Kate, potentially takes lives. And not only that, when she shot that arrow at the Tracksuit Mafia guy, one of the main ones, and it just bounced off him, that hit right here. That was gonna impale him if it was lethal right here. So I just want some kind of acknowledgement at the character going through with the choice to lethally take down one of them. And I'm pretty sure, as you're seeing on screen right now, these two people are freaking dead. So yeah, self-defense, A-okay with me. Just kind of acknowledge, or some kind of line about Hawkeye maybe saying, taking lives isn't easy, even if it's the bad guys. I don't know, call that cheesy, but I think it's still relevant to address. Oh man, they had to get me again. If you guys watch my first couple of episodes review, I get really hit by the family stuff, and that scene between Kate and Clint with his son on the phone, that just really made me feel sad, when he's like, it's okay if you can't come home from Christmas. Just kind of obviously rubbing in the whole thing with Clint in this whole show. The question is, will it get done in time? And I'm still dying to know, what will happen with the revelation of surely Echo will find out, or in some way or another, Ronin will be exposed as being Clint. And I'm just thinking, how is she not going to want to kill him for what he did to her father? I mean, will it ever get out then? I would love to know your theories with that. But as we draw towards the end of the episode, we have now, I fully admit this is a nitpick, it's just the way Echo's shoe came down on that earpiece. It feels like it would need a little bit more than some soldering to fix that. Probably a replacement, but either way, I understand how we couldn't go throughout the series with him really struggling to hear things. I mean, maybe he could have got a new one. That would have been a bit more believable for me, because the way that one was crushed was pretty, definitive, in my opinion. Kate is still very adamant about the branding, when Clint isn't so much, and we do get some nods to the classical Hawkeye suit. We get some more walking the line hints in terms of Ronin, and I feel a bit bad for Kate in the sense that she has no idea, because she's somewhat picking up saying you can't say who Ronin is because it's someone close to you, isn't it? It's like, is it going to be somewhat don't meet your heroes kind of thing when she realizes that, oh, Hawkeye was Ronin, and you may think that, oh, maybe that won't change your mind too much, but then she might, really digest the fact that Ronin, albeit he tried to clean up the city in some way, shape, or form, he did brutally murder people. So I'm really interested to see what happens when Kate does probably very likely find out the true identity, and that is obviously, in fact, Clint. Yet again, though, in this moment, we get some more hints towards Wilson Fisk as Kate and Clint are walking, and they're talking about the Tracksuit Mafia and how they started small, but grew. And I love how potentially we know that Clint has walked in or had a run-in with Kingpin before, because he says, but the guy at the top would do anything to grow the operation. And there's someone above Echo, someone you don't want to mess with. And it's like, it's interesting hearing Clint even say that, the Hawkeye, because, Kingpin's interesting. Here's a guy you could probably just take out with a bow and arrow like that, or like how Daredevil could punch his face in. But even these characters know he is someone so much to be reckoned with. And that is the brilliance of Kingpin in of himself. He is, I guess, this very vulnerable target in a way, yet people, even arguably an Avenger, knows enough that he shouldn't really be messed with. And I kind of just love that somewhat world-building aspect to it. And the fact that this is the MCU, not just the Netflix world, this is now being talked about in the MCU, which kind of makes me a little bit excited, albeit that I hope they don't butcher him. In this moment, though, they decide that they need to get a little bit more intel on Kaza, not to mention how, yes, there is very much so a good hunch about Jack, especially with the butterscotch sweet as well, but as Clint does say, it's not exactly airtight, and as I think a lot of us are picking up, it's too obvious to be Jack, and a lot of people are thinking that it is indeed Kate's mother behind quite a lot of this, Eleanor. And at the same time, I feel like that's kind of easy to guess, but maybe for the general audience, it will be quite the surprise. So Kate finds out that Kaza is an employee of Sloan Limited, which is very interesting, especially when you take into account that, as we just mentioned in the source material, and what they're showing in the show, that he very much so knows about Uncle. I guess Kingpin owns Sloan. I would love if there could be any more insight from that from you guys in the comments. But when she looked up Jack, she got kicked out the system, which is when it turns out that Jack is in the penthouse because Clint wanders around after hearing something, and he is held, well, I was about to say to gunpoint, but to sword point, with his own frickin' Ronin sword, which of course Jack picked up at the black market auction. So I thought this was a decent way to end the episode, just in terms of obviously setting things up for the continuation of that moment in the penthouse. And it feels like, despite as much as I've talked about this episode, it's not like a whole bunch happened. It felt like more or less one thing was happening after the other. And that's not a bad thing. It was a really decently paced episode, a lot of action, a lot of cool teasers to bringing those great Marvel, Netflix, Daredevil characters into the MCU. I've got a feeling that Jack may reveal quite a bit about himself in the next episode and might come out a bit candid with just how he is quite skilled with his swordsman, source material, just expertise, if you will, because he was definitely hiding that, as we know, in the fencing spar session, if you will. Not to mention, he really wanted Ronin's sword, and he's got Ronin right in front of him, but I don't know if this will be the moment that's all revealed. Either way, though, guys, I'm very much so looking forward to seeing Hawkeye continue, despite some of the issues I may say, they're not, massively intrusive on the entertainment that I get out the show, and the biggest entertainment that is being supplied to me consistently is the biggest selling point, and that is Kate Bishop and Clint, and also they are getting some brownie points for me, which is is a bit of an easy sucker one for me, and that is the little teasers of Wilson Fisk and seeing where that can go. And I think a lot of us are kind of living for what the larger thing could mean with all of this playing in the background. But everyone, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I would really appreciate a like. It really does help the channel out, so thank you so much if you do go ahead and leave one. If you're brand new here, subscribe for more Marvel content just like this, as well as DC and other bits and bobs. But other than that, everyone, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you people of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the next video. Goodbye.